بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد فإن أحسن الكلام كلام الله وخير الهدى هدى محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم وإن شر الأمور محدثاتها وكل محدثة بدعة وكل بدعة ضلالة وكل ضلالة في النار. So today this is lesson number 5 in the section on Al-Qadr, and it is lesson number 40 overall in our series on Taqreeb Tadmuriyyah. And in the previous lesson we started looking at, so in the lessons before we looked at the levels of Al-Qadr, the level of knowledge, the level of writing, the level of the will, the Mashi'ah, and the level of creation. And in the lesson after that we explained how Al-Qadr, meaning Allah's prior knowledge of all things, and Allah writing down all things, and Allah willing all things, and Allah creating all things, that in no way contradicts the fact that these things happen by way of the ways and means that Allah has put within His creation, right? So there are asbab, there are ways and means which are in Allah's creation, and these ways and means are how Allah's creation functions. So Allah created all things, all entities. He gave them their attributes, the sifat. He gave them their properties, qualities, their actions. This includes living beings and includes other than living beings, right? So water, fire, air, stone, everything has an essence, has properties, has qualities, and everything that takes place in the creation is by way of these asbab, right? These are the created ways and means. And likewise, there are also legislated ways and means, which are from the legislation, from the Sharia, and these are the affairs of worship and the affairs of obedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, by which we earn His pleasure and enter into paradise. So likewise, paradise is through the ways and means, just like in the life of this world, earning a living, having children, removing hunger, removing thirst, is also through the ways and means, right? So the ways and means, the asbab, this is part and parcel of Al-Qadr, right? It is from Al-Qadr, it is part and parcel of Al-Qadr, and Al-Qadr itself is from the Tawheed of Allah Azza wa Jal. So we covered that in the previous lesson, and we looked at the creational asbab. We spoke of that, how we have to affirm the creational asbab, and we study them and we gain a better understanding of what Allah created. We exploit it for our benefit in agriculture, in industry, in technology, in science, in so many different things, right? Because we study these asbab, and likewise in medicine and so on and so forth. Similarly, the legislated asbab, we study the religion, and we learn what is obedience, what is disobedience, and we learn how to enter into paradise by adopting and acting upon the asbab. At the end of the previous lesson, we finished on a note, which is that we have to make an important condition or qualification when we speak of the asbab, right? Whether it is religious asbab, or whether it is creational asbab, which is that they have to be valid, they have to be authentic, they have to be proven, right? So in the religion, when it comes to religion, then the affairs of worship, the affairs of obedience, they have to have evidence. They have to be proven by way of the Quran and the Sunnah and the action of the Sahaba. Otherwise, this is not a valid means in the religion. And similarly, when it comes to worldly affairs, then the means that we take also have to be valid as well. And this applies to many, many different fields, and particularly in the field of medicine. Like, for example, if somebody claimed that if you have a bad back, that you hug a tree for half an hour and it removes your bad back, then we know this is false. This is tree hugging doesn't remove your, the pain in your back, because it's not empirically proven, it's not empirically tested, right? So in the worldly sense, the ways and the means also have to be established, which means that we have to add a word, as the Shaykh uses the word here. He says, فَتَبَيَّنَ أَنَّ الْأَسْبَابَ الشَّرْعِيَّةَ الصَّحِيحَةَ, right? So it becomes clear that the legislated, authentic ways and means, أو الكونية الصحيحة, or the creational, authentic ways and means, لا تنافي القدر. They do not clash with al-qadar. They don't clash with al-qadar. And rather, بل هي من القدر. Rather, they are from al-qadar, because we have been commanded to adopt them, in the Sharia, and we also benefit from them in the worldly sense. So that's the note that we finished on in the previous lesson, that the ways and means are part and parcel of al-qadr. From this point, we now are going to look at where do the people stand on this issue, right? So in understanding this issue, there are two extremes on either side, and there are those who are in the middle, who affirm and accept the truth. Right, so we're going to look at these these three groups, and we've already alluded to this anyway in the previous lessons. So the Shaykh goes on to say, rahimahullah, وَالنَّاسُ فِي الْأَسْبَابِ طَرَفَانِ وَوَسَطٍ. So the people, when it comes to this actual issue of the ways and means, right, the asbab, which are within Allah's creation, there are two sides, two extremes, and there is one which is in the middle. So as for the first, فَالطَّرَفُ الْأَوَّلِ, as for the first group, which is, to one side, they are as the Shaykh says, نُفَاتٌ أَنْكَرُوا تَأْثِيرَ الْأَسْبَابِ وَجَعَلُوهَا مُجَرَّدْ عَلَامَاتٍ يَحْصُلُ الشَّيْء عِنْدَهَا لَا بِهَا حتى قالوا إن انكسار الزجاجة بالحجر إذا رميتها به حصل عند الإصابة لا بها. وهؤلاء خالفوا السمع وكابروا الحس وأنكروا حكمة الله تعالى في ربط المسببات بأسبابها. So basically this passage means that the first group are those who deny the asbab. They reject the asbab, or the effect of the asbab. Right, meaning that causes have effects. They deny this. And what they say is, they say that the causes are just merely signs and indications which, if they are present, then the effect will coincide with it, not that the effect is caused by it. Right, so let me give you an example. Right, so if you take a rock and you throw it at the window, right? So what these people are saying is that within Allah's creation, it's habitual that when a heavy rock, coincides, in hitting a glass, at that point in time, the glass breaks separately without it having anything to do with the power and the force and the momentum of the rock, right? So it's coincidental that the glass broke. And what Allah did is He created the effect of the breaking independently of the rock, right? So meaning this is just a coincidence. This is like if you like, it's like a habitual coincidence that in Allah's creation, whenever you have a rock and it's thrown at the window, Allah will then create independently of the rock an instance of the glass breaking, and so therefore it means that the breaking of the glass coincided with the throwing of the rock, not that the rock was a cause in the breaking of the window, right? So this is the kind of reasoning that they are bringing here. And so they said that the breaking of a glass or a bottle with a stone, when you throw the stone, right, it happened to coincide with the throwing, not because of the throwing of the rock. All right? Now these people, as the Shaykh says, وَهَؤُلَاءِ خَالَفُوا السَّمْعِ وَكَابَرُوا الْحِسِّ وَأَنْكَرُوا حِكْمَةَ اللَّهِ تَعَالَى فِي رَبْطِ الْمُسَبَّبَاتِ بِأَسْبَابِهَا. These people, they oppose revelation, and they are arrogant in rejecting what we know and see from experience. And they rejected the wisdom of Allah, the Exalted, in tying the causes and the effects, right? So this is what they are saying. This is opposes revelation, because in the revelation we know, for example, many verses, Allah says He sent down the rain, and Allah revives the earth by way of the rain, right? So the water has properties which revives the earth, which provides vegetation from the earth. So the water has that property. The water does that thing by the decree of Allah. So we can't deny that the water has that property, and the water was a cause, right? Whereas what these people are saying is Allah sends down the rain, and coincidental to the rain, without it having anything to do with the rain, Allah brings vegetation out of the earth. So it's a coincidence, not that one is the cause for the other, right? So this is their understanding of the causes and the effects. And the reason, as the Shaykh will explain, and the Shaykh goes on to explain in his commentary of this, that these people, they rejected the asbab. And they say the asbab are just merely signs and indications. And when they are present, then other things come to be, not because of them, but to coincide with them, right? So as the Shaykh gives the same example, you throw the rock, it hits the bottle breaks. The bottle didn't break because of the rock, it was just coincidental. It is that Allah freshly created the instance of breaking in the bottle to coincide with the throwing of the rock. It had nothing to do with the rock. And so the rock didn't really break it, but the contact was coincidental, and it led to the break. So all of this, what they are saying is that if we affirm for the cause that the rock broke the bottle, it means that something other than Allah brought about or created an effect that wasn't there before. This is the reasoning now, right? This is the reasoning. This is the rationale behind it. That if we say the rock broke the glass bottle, we have now established a partner to Allah, right? That something now is sharing with Allah, and we've committed shirk with Allah because we've made something else to be the thing that performs or brings about the breaking of the glass in this instance, right? And this is really weird, and it's false reasoning. It opposes revelation, it opposes reason, and it's because in the revelation clearly Allah Azza wa Jal has affirmed the asbab al-shar'iyyah and al-kawniyah, the legislative and the creational. Allah has affirmed in the Quran, for example, the clearest example is the water, or the wind, for example, that drives the clouds, right? And so the wind is a cause, and the sun, for example, is a cause of the night and day, and the water is a cause for the vegetation, the grass growing, the vegetation, the plants, and this is in the Quran itself. So this opposes revelation, and it opposes also sound reason. So what we say correctly is that the rock indeed broke the glass because of a property. There were some properties. First of all, the rock has the property of like density and weight, heaviness and strength and solidity and so on and so forth. Secondly, probably has a greater density than the weight than the glass. And thirdly, because of the momentum, the force with which it is thrown by somebody else, by someone, all of that collectively is what led to the glass breaking. So we affirm for the rock its properties of hardness, which was part and parcel of bringing the effect. We affirm also the momentum or the speed that was probably, from somebody who threw the rock. And we say that these properties were given by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to these things. Allah put this property in the rock. Allah gave the ability for the human to throw something with momentum. And through all of these things combined, the effect came to be. So we can attribute the effect to the rock, to the throwing. But we say all of that is by the permission and the decree and the creation of Allah Azza wa Jal, because He is the creator of all of these things. He's the creator of the stone and its density and weight and so on and so forth and its strength. He's the creator of the human and his power and his ability and so on and so forth. And so Allah Azza wa Jal is the one who gives the causes their properties and their powers. Right? So an example of this, and if He wants to, He can change those properties if He wishes at any moment in time. Right? So we know from the story of Ibrahim alayhi salam, when his people, they tried to burn him in the fire, they threw him into the pit, into the fire. And so Allah Azza wa Jal, He said, Ya naru kuni bardan wa salaman ala Ibrahim. Allah said to the fire, O fire, be cool and be safe, provide safety for Ibrahim. And so Allah Azza wa Jal, fire, which we know routinely, without fail, ordinarily speaking in Allah's creation, it burns. It is hot, it burns. He, Allah Azza wa Jal, He altered the property of fire, and He's able to do this with anything that He wishes in His creation. So, therefore, if we say that the rock indeed has an effect, or that the water indeed has an effect, or that the food that we eat indeed has an effect in removing hunger, and the water in quenching thirst, and the rock in breaking the glass, that these have ta'thir. We affirm that there is a ta'thir, meaning to have the power to give the effect. Then we have not committed shirk with Allah Azza wa Jal. This is not shirk with Allah Azza wa Jal. Right? Because Allah Azza wa Jal is the one who created the effects, and He is the one who created the causes. He created the causes and He created the effects. And these causes, they do not act independently. They do not act independently, rather they only act and have their effect by the permission of Allah, by the decree of Allah, and by His wisdom, because He's the one who tied the causes and the effects together, and by His control and by His regulation, right? So there is no contradiction in any of this. So this first position is false, right? The people who deny that causes have effects, that things happen by way of causes, and these causes have like inherent properties. This is false. This would mean that we are not allowed to, we're not able to do, it would mean that we would not be able to understand science and study the creation in a meaningful sense, because for these reasons. So this is the first group. The second group, the Shaykh goes on to say, he goes on to say, وَالطَّرَفُ الثَّانِي, the second party or the second group, they are غُلَاةٌ أثبتوا تأثير الأسباب لكنهم غلوا في ذلك وجعلوها مؤثرة بذاتها. These are the extremists who affirm the effects. So they affirm that things have effects, but then they exaggerated in those effects and in those causes, and they made the causes to have the effect on their own, independently, right? So this now clearly is shirk with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This you find amongst the atheists, the naturalists, because they have this philosophical naturalism and materialism, and what they say is, well, basically, since we know, the causes behind the effects, then we don't need, we don't need to have a creator to explain, or the one who placed these causes and their effects. And so they exaggerated in this, and basically by doing this, they affirmed another creator alongside Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? So for example, when the naturalists and the atheists and the materialists, what they say is, well, we know how creation works, we know chemistry, we know biology, we know the mechanics of everything, the physics and everything, and so we know how combustion takes place, we know how this and that takes place, so therefore we don't need, these things happen because of these inherent properties of all of these things, right? Of water, of fire, of oxygen, of whatever it might be. So we don't need, these things in themselves, by virtue of their own properties, they bring about whatever we see and observe in creation. So this is like, as we said, the atheists, the naturalists, the materialists, and anyone who basically followed in their steps. So effectively what they are saying then is that there is a creator or a mujid, one who brings about things in addition to Allah or alongside Allah Azza wa Jal. And again, these people also, they opposed وَخَالَفُوا السَّمْعِ وَالْحِسِّ, they opposed revelation, they opposed observation. And the Shaykh says, فَقَدْ دَلَّ الْكِتَابُ وَالسُّنَّةُ وَإِجْمَاءُ الْأُمَّةِ عَلَى أَنَّهُ لَا خَالِقَ إِلَّا اللَّهُ كما أننا نعلم بشاهد المحسوس أن الأسباب قد تتخلف عنها مسبباتها بإذن الله كما في تخلف إحراق النار لإبراهيم الخليل حين ألقي فيها فقال الله تعالى يا نار كوني بردا وسلاما على إبراهيم فكانت بردا وسلاما عليه ولم يحترق بها. The Shaykh goes on to say in this lengthy paragraph that the Quran and the Sunnah and the consensus of the Ummah have indicated that there is no creator except Allah. And just as we know that the causes, because these people claim that everything is explained by the causes, but we know, and we know from experience, that not all the time, for example, a person might drink water, he drinks water because he's thirsty, but he had a salty meal beforehand, and so the salty meal, the salt, is now preventing the water from having its effect. So just because the water has a quality and a property of quenching thirst doesn't mean it's always going to happen, right? And just because the rain produces vegetation, it doesn't mean that every time it rains, because it might rain so much and too much that the soil becomes waterlogged and there's no vegetation, even though the water has that property, right? And even though that sabab or that cause is present, it didn't bring about the effect. And that's because Allah Azza wa Jal is the creator of all of the systems of cause and effect, and so therefore we cannot explain what happens in creation as the atheists and the materialists as they do, because we know there are so many conditions and other causes that are necessary for those effects to take place, right? Not just because of the property of one thing, right? So this shows that on the other side, this is also an exaggeration when you try to explain everything purely by the causes and their properties, and you negate the one who created these things and who put those properties in those things. So the Shaykh says in his commentary that these people also made a mistake. They opposed, they exaggerated in affirming the asbab, and they made the causes to independently have the effect. And we know this is not true, right? Because in Allah's creation, there are interconnected systems of cause and effect, and there's no thing except that it needs another thing for it to be a cause, right? There's nothing in existence except Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? So with the exception of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, no other thing is free of need of another thing, right? So within this creation, everything is in need of something besides it for it to be a cause and for it to have an effect, right? So for example, the soil in itself will not produce the vegetation. The seed in itself will not produce the vegetation. The water will not produce, alongside that, will not produce vegetation. You need sunlight as well, right? So you need all these things, and then within the soil has to be a certain acidity or alkalinity. There has to be sufficient nitrogen in the soil, which is then produced by the worms, because the worms in the soil, they fix the nitrogen, and then there have to be certain bacteria. So like you see the complexity now of the asbab. And every one of these individual elements in the scheme of things is in need of others, of the other elements, right? So nothing can independently bring about an effect. Nothing in this creation can bring about an effect independently. Nothing. The fire needs oxygen, right? It needs, so everything is like this. Then the Shaykh says, in fact, he gives an example, and he says, look, for example, if you to throw some water upon some, he says, turab, some dust or some sand, then what will happen is it will become like for example, you take cement, for example, and you have limestone, you have sand, you mix it together, you throw some water on top of it. Now this will become like plaster, become like cement or plaster. And so, you say that these people would say, oh, well, the water is what caused the plaster to form by itself, independently, on its own. And we know that's not true. And likewise, they say, look, if you put wood on fire, then the fire independently will create charcoal, will create coals out of the fire, because it is independently having its effect. So all of this is incorrect. It's shirk with Allah Azza wa Jal, because it's affirming a mu'athir, something having an effect. It's affirming a mujid, something that brings things into existence alongside Allah, right? And this is not correct. Allah Azza wa Jal is the one who can change things, because he's the one who put properties in things. For example, Musa alayhi salam, he took the staff and he struck the rock. And from the rock, water gushed forth. Ordinarily speaking, this doesn't happen, right? But Allah Azza wa Jal, He altered the asbab and the properties of things, and He made this to happen because He is the creator of the asbab, as we said. So this means that the effect of all things, even though there are properties in these things through which the effects come to be, nevertheless, they only have the effect by the permission of Allah, and because Allah put those properties in those things. Right? So this now shows the mistake of this other group. This is also not correct. We cannot hold this view regarding the asbab, because now so on the one hand, we are not like the Ash'aris. The Ash'aris are the ones who deny causes and their effects, the first group, the Ash'aris, right? Things do not have inherent properties. We are not like them, because this would mean, really, it's like a negation of the foundation of science, of studying Allah's creation, things having inherent properties, right? It's a negation of science. On the other side, we are now going into exaggeration of the atheists and naturalists and the materialists, who basically say, well, everything happens by the inherent properties of things, right? And this is also false. This is not true, because we know from experience that even though the cause might be present, the effect doesn't always take place, because it's multifactorial, it's multi-causal, it's complex, it's interwoven, right? And nothing can ever produce its effect independent from other things, right? And this shows that the only being, the only existence, the only being who is Al-Ghani, the one who is free of all need, is Allah Azza wa Jal. Everything besides him needs something else. And all of that ultimately, needs Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for it to exist and for it to function. So these are the two groups. The third, which is the middle and the balanced group, وَأَمَّا الْوَسَطِ فهم الذين هدوا إلى الحق وتوسطوا بين الفريقين وأخذوا بما مع كل واحد منهما من الحق فأثبتوا للأسباب تأثيرا في مسبباتها لكن لا بذاتها بل بما أودعه الله تعالى فيها من القوى الموجبة. So he says that as for the middle group, they are the ones who are guided to the truth, and they are in moderation between these two groups. They took the truth that is with each group, and therefore they affirmed the causes. So they affirmed the causes, unlike the Ash'aris over here, and they affirm the effects that they have, like those people over here, but not independently by themselves, but by what Allah has placed in them of these properties, and by His permission, by way of the inherent properties that He put in these things. So this group, they are the middle group, they are the moderate group, they are the ones who have been granted success in arriving at the truth, and they combined between al-manqul wa jama'u bayn al-manqul wal-ma'qul wal-mahsus. So what has this group done, right? This group has combined between the manqul, which is revealed knowledge, meaning the Quran. They took that, and the ma'qul meaning that which is understood, comprehension, the intellect, and al-mahsus, that which is physically observed and experienced, right? They've combined all of these three things together. Al-manqul, wal-ma'qul, wal-mahsus. And here there's actually a benefit as it relates to science, that whenever we have any theories, because in the worldly sense, there's when we develop theories, there's different elements to the theories, right? There's conceptualizing the theory, the concept. Then there's the mathematics, the mathematics, and then there's the physical aspect of it in reality, right? So there's what the mind happens in the mind, then there's the mathematics of it, and then there's the actual physical reality of it, right? In a sound theory, all three have to agree, right? All three have to reconcile and be in agreement, right? So the mathematics has to agree with the physical reality, and it has to conceptually you have to agree with the whole thing, right? What tends to happen is, especially in the 21st century, with a lot of the pseudoscience, is that these people, they conceptualize something, an idea, then they justify it through mathematics, and it has no correlation with physical reality. There's no correlation with it at all, right? And this is what you find with a lot of the physics of the 21st century, after it was corrupted by people like Einstein and other, the people who were paying him, behind him, to basically hide the fact that they couldn't prove the Earth's motion, and so therefore they had to rewrite physics to hide all of that, right? And that's what the 21st century physics is really about, and the astronomy, that's what it's all about. But they won't tell you that in the schools, colleges, in the textbooks, but that's what the reality of the situation is, and it's all there in the historical record. You can go back to the newspapers, you can go back to the journals, you can go back to the writings of the prominent people at the time. This was the thing that they were trying to solve. How can we, the Earth's not moving, and how can we, explain away the experiments that failed to detect the Earth's motion? So they concocted a new fraudulent physics to basically explain that away. And to do that, they had to divorce the conceptualization, the ideation in the mind, and the mathematics from physical reality, and play tricks over here, right? And that's how they do it. So if you understand that point, the same here, that we as Muslims, we have to combine between the manqul, what has come in the Quran and the Sunnah, with the ma'qul, that which is understood, intelligible, like conceptually in the mind, and that which is mahsus, that which is the physical reality. We have to combine all these things together. And if we make sure that there's no conflict between any of these things, then we will be correct in our science, in our study, in our research. These things have to come together. So even though here we are speaking about al-qadr and the mistake of these people, this statement here made by Shaykh Ibn Uthaymeen, that we combine between the manqul and the ma'qul and the mahsus, this is general to all, this is to all things. It applies to all things, right, that we study and observe in the creation. So the Shaykh goes on to say that since al-qadr, as we already established, does not negate the creational and the legislated ways and means. Actually, now what we're doing here is we're moving to a, right, so what we're doing here now, we're bridging into a new point now, so pay attention. Whatever we've discussed here about the causes and the effects, we are now moving and bringing this discussion now into the field of man's actions, right? Because this now brings us to the misunderstandings to do with al-qadr, right? So what I want you to understand is, we've just explained in relation to the material causes and effects that there are some people who negate the causes, some people who exaggerate in the causes, and we are in the middle and we take the truth, right? And we've given some clear examples of the water, being a cause in producing vegetation, right? And the rock being a cause in the breaking of the glass when it's thrown at it with the momentum, right? You understand this clearly in relation to these physical things, right? That these things do have properties, they do have effects, we can attribute effects to them, but we say it is by the permission of Allah, it is something endowed and given by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If you can grasp this in relation to material things, then as we move to the discussion of man's actions, the discussion is the same. The discussion is the same. And it will help us to resolve the problems that people bring in relation to al-qadr, right? How can Allah decree actions upon the servants and then punish them? Right? Right? So these misconceptions arise because of not understanding this issue very clearly and very carefully. So at this point in the text, it's like a bridge moving into, the next topic. So the Shaykh says that when al-qadr, believing in al-qadr, that Allah has prior knowledge, that He wrote it down, that He wills things to be, then He creates them and brings them to be, right? When al-qadr does not contradict the legislated and creational ways and means, then it also does not contradict the fact that a servant has irada and qudra, and that he is fa'il, that he has a fi'l, right? So in other words, let me explain what this means. Let's take water. Allah Azza wa Jalla has put certain qualities in water, right? It is thirst quenching, it is life giving, it is whatever else, right? Because Allah put these properties in the water, and this is part and parcel of al-qadr. So we can say that the water quenched the thirst, right? And whatever else we want to say, but by the permission of Allah. Just as Allah Azza wa Jalla put these things in the water, similarly in relation to man, He put in him an irada and a qudra, and He made him to be one who is able to act by way of these two things, irada and qudra. So man is an acting being, he acts, he's able to act, he has the power and the ability and the choice to act. Allah made man to be like that, just as in the same way He put properties in every other thing, right? The hardness in a rock, and the, whatever other properties He put in all other things. So some of the evidences for what we've just said, for irada and qudra and fi'l, of these three things ascribed to man, Allah Azza wa Jalla, He says in the Quran, minkum man yuridu dunya wa minkum man yuridu al-akhirah. Amongst you is the one who desires irada, he desires the world, and amongst you is the one who desires the hereafter. Surah Ali Imran, verse 152, 3152. And likewise, the statement of Allah Azza wa Jal, وَغَدَوْا, He said, وَغَدَوْا عَلَى وَغَدَوْا عَلَى حَرْدٍ قَادِرِينَ. Right, speaking about these people who came they had like fields and gardens of herbage and growth, and they went to them thinking they had like full power over the harvest, right? So Allah said قَادِرِينَ, meaning that they had ability and power. And this is Surah Al-Qalam 68 verse 35. وَلَوْ أَنَّهُمْ فَعَلُوا مَا يُوعَظُونَ بِهِ لَكَانَ خَيْرًا لَهُمْ وَأَشَدَّ تَثْبِيتًا. If only they did that which they had been admonished with, it would have been better for them and greater in firmness. So here Allah established fi'l for mankind, right? Surah An-Nisa, Surah 4 verse 66. And also, man amila salihan falinafsih wa man asaa fa'alayha. Whoever did a righteous deed, whoever worked a righteous deed, it is for his own benefit, and whoever did evil, it is against him. So man amila, so amal has been affirmed for man, right? So meaning that these evidences from the Quran, what do they affirm? They affirm man has an irada, man has qudra, man has fi'l that he does, man has amal, that he does deeds. All of this has been ascribed to man in the same way that life-giving quality is given to water, that the earth is revived by the water, and just like properties in all other things, right? So we're making that bridge, moving from that, the material, to the living, and understanding that it's the same thing. Allah has put properties here, Allah has put properties here, which makes man to now be able to will and desire and to act. And now the same thing applies to man as it did with those things, right? Do we negate that man has power and will and the ability to act? No, we don't negate that, because Allah put that in man. But do we exaggerate and say man wills and does his actions and creates his own actions outside of the power and the will and the control of Allah? No, we don't say that. We don't say that. Rather, he is still under the willpower and control of Allah Azza wa Jal, right? So these two things are the same, right? And so we're making that bridge between what we discussed before, and we are moving to discussion of man's actions, because this is where the problematic issues come for the people who became misguided in the issues of al-qadar. So what we'll do is we'll actually stop at this point. We'll stop our lesson at this point, and we can use that as a starting point to continue in the next lesson, insha'Allah ta'ala, because it's a good place to stop. So we'll conclude there. In today's lesson, we looked at people and their positions towards the asbab, two extremes, one in the middle, and we used that as a bridge to move into the issue of man's actions, but the discussion is exactly the same, right? Material things or living things, men, it's the same discussion. So if we can understand that without any problem, then we can understand this issue without any problem as well, and the issues are, resolved. We have no problem in understanding the issue of al-qadar, and the fact that Allah knows everything before it happens, He wills everything. That doesn't mean that we are not responsible and held to account, right? There's no conflict or contradiction in any of these things. So we'll stop there for now. We'll continue in the next lesson. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, wa sallallahu ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in.